You've lived a great life and done well for yourself. But what mark will you leave on the world? How will you inspire future generations? Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand have helped thousands of people answer exactly those questions. If you've ever wondered, what will be my legacy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Stan and Katie Beth.
All right, and welcome back to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. My guest today is a grief coach, an author, and the founder of Butterflies and Halos. Her name is Angie Hanson, and she is here to share her wisdom with us today. So Angie, thank you so much for making time to join me.
Yes, thank you for having me, Katie.
So you have a really unique story. So before I dive in with a bunch of questions, I was going to see if you'd take a few minutes and tell our listeners a little bit about your background, some of the different things that you went through that really inspired you to launch Butterflies and Halos.
For sure. So my why really is the heart of my legacy, really. It kind of fits in really well with your program here, but back in 2006, my husband, Jack, and we lost our son, our 1-year-old son, Garrett, unexpectedly due to a heart defect. And at that time, we had a 4-year-old daughter, Gracie, and that really just kind of spun our life into a tailspin of grief that we didn't know even existed. And so going forward, we had the support of our family and our community and our friends. And about a year and 3 months after our son Garrett had died, my husband Jack was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer. He was diagnosed with ocular melanoma that had spread basically to his brain, his liver, and his spleen. And with that, we were already still grieving our son, and we just kind of put our grief on the back burner to fight for Jack's survival. And Jack really just had a huge heart, and he fought his battle really as hard as he could. And he ended up losing his life on February 8th, 2009. And so then at that moment, that left me as a widow and a single mom and still grieving my son and my husband now. And, I really didn't know where to turn. And going a month forward, my brother Seth had actually been battling a brain tumor for 5 years. And a month after my husband died, he just started having issues again. And he had always bounced back from those issues. He had already had 2 brain surgeries to remove the tumors, and they always proved to be successful. And this time it just really took a toll on him, and he had his 3rd brain surgery a month after my husband died, and he ended up not bouncing back. And my brother Seth lost his life on April 7th, 2009, so exactly 2 months after my husband. And so that really was the beginning of my story and where my heart kind of sat for a long time. And and then it took me many, many years for me to find what I wanted to do with my grief.
So an incredible story, a very difficult story. On those darkest days, so a lot of people maybe listening have experienced something similar to one of those events. I would say, hopefully, it's pretty rare that people would experience that many extremely difficult events. Just back to back to back. And like you said, unexpected. All of those were just, even with your husband's cancer, that diagnosis was extremely unexpected. And so tell our listeners a little bit about, obviously you've taken this and turned it into a mission, but before we dive into that, what got you out of bed after that, in 2009, in April of 2009? What got you out of bed? How did you do that? I know you have a daughter, Gracie.
Yeah.
What really inspired you to take the grief that you'd been through and choose to keep moving forward?
Well, I honestly after first couple weeks, after everything kind of quieted down, I realized that I had 2 options, and I could make that choice whether I survived and lived or I wallowed in my grief and became a terrible mother. Chose the path of darkness, which could have been, drugs, alcohol, just not being a good mom. And every morning I'd look up at my little girl, Gracie, and I just knew that she deserved more. She deserved a life, a beautiful life, and we deserved a beautiful life. And I knew from the talks that I had with my husband, Jack, that he wanted me to continue, be this mom, live a full life with Gracie, however that looked. It was not going to be easy, but I knew it could be doable. And I had to have the strength. And it was really her that got me up every day because I had to. There was just us. And then I leaned heavily on journaling. That was where it all started a lot for me, was journaling. When our son Garrett died, the tears, when they wouldn't stop, I would journal. And that was my release. And it's something as simple as that can really turn your pain into purpose.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's a really inspiring story just to find the courage to wake up and move forward in the midst of insufferable grief. It's a very inspiring story, though I'm sure it did not feel that way at the time. There's a lot of things that you've done where you've taken this experience and this grief and turned it into positive things. So for our listeners who may not know anything about Butterflies and Halos, I wanted to touch on just some of the different things that you do. So we'll start with this, but I have a whole bunch of things to talk through. So one is books. You've written a whole series of really interesting books, all kind of based on this idea of grief and resilience. So tell our listeners a little bit about your 4 books and kind of what they can expect from those.
Yeah, my initial beginning book, Chapters of Resilient Heart, that is my memoir. And I was just really like, how can I turn my loss into light? And how can I transform all my personal grief into hope to help others, right? And my memoir is about my people. It's their life, their beautiful lives, and their unfortunate losses, their deaths. I dive deep into that. I get very personal and real. And then I talk about how we survived, and I categorized each one of my people into separate chapters because they deserved that. And then as I move forward through the book, my daughter Gracie also has a chapter, and she wrote in there about how she felt at that age, what she could remember. We kind of talked about stuff when I was writing. And then yeah, it has about, I'm a remarried widow, as I call myself. So it talks about dating and remarrying, hope, faith, resilience. So that really is the heart of my book and where I really transformed that. And then my next book, they're all anthologies that I've written in. And the first one is called Resilient AF, Stories of Resilience. And that one is just a small chapter of my resilience through all my losses and my grief and how I've navigated it, how I've found it, and how I've bounced forward with it. And then my second anthology it's called Grace and Grit, and it's basically my anchor and hope. And my chapter is a little bit longer, but it's my faith journey. And it's basically how I had lost my faith after all my losses, but how I found it again, and how during that whole time, I realized that I had that faith still inside of me, but I had to believe and I had to find that hope again. And then lastly, it's called My Stories of Families and Friends Lost. And this chapter is actually really about my late husband, Jack. And the main author and co-founder of the book, Trunis Goggins, he asked me to specifically write about the cancer journey and widow, as he hadn't had anybody on as a widow or widower. So it's Jack's cancer journey and a lot of information from Jack, as he had a Caring Bridge site. So all these books are different, but they all touch on just how we can move forward. And I hope people that read them can heal from reading that.
That's incredible. I hope our listeners who may be going through this or may know someone who's going through this grief process and can connect with this will take the opportunity to really check those out. They look really good. So I can't wait to dive into those. But beyond that, so you've written your books, told your story, and there's a lot of inspiration in that. I also thought that it was really cool that you got into stationery and creating other really cool, unique gifts as well. When we're filming this, so this will come out after the new year, but we're filming it right here, about 20 days before Christmas. And so I'm just looking through, there's holiday cards and there's birthday cards and there's all sorts of things. What inspired you to take your grief and turn that into a line of stationery and products that were encouraging?
Well, the biggest thing is as I've went through all these losses, I received an abundance of greeting cards and sympathy cards. And I just, it took me a while, but I was sitting there and I'm just like, why do we have cards that just say, I'm so sorry for your loss with deepest sympathy? I get the empathy and the sympathetic wording there, and they're well meant, right? But I'm just like, if my spouse or my friend's spouse died, my best friend, I would not give her a greeting card that said that because we don't talk like that to each other. So I wanted to create cards that connected people, comforted them, and remembered loved ones with a little honesty, empathy, snark, and humor. And so I was just sitting there one night and I was just like, I think we were actually watching a show, my husband and I was like, why can't I send a card to my friend that says, I don't know what to say. Let's go eat one of those damn casseroles, and that's kind of honestly how it bloomed. And then I started, on my phone, on my notes app, I was just starting to write down things that were popping up in my head. And there's a lot of cliche terms that surround grief. And as a griever, we know what they are, and it becomes a lot. And they're hard to hear sometimes, like everything happens for a reason, but yeah, I don't know.
No, I love that. I love that everything's unique. And I love that, obviously the story of your faith is weaved into all of this and that gives you hope. So there's a real positive spin on everything that you have on your site. But I also love the humor in it. I think that's so fun. That's what a lot of people need. Nobody wants 15,000 cards that say with deepest sympathy. Something that seems a little irreverent and makes someone laugh at a time of grief can really be an absolute game changer. So I think that's really cool that you took kind of your experience as the receiver and turned it into a series of cards that you wish had been available when you needed those. So very cool, very fun. So beyond that, you also do grief coaching. And so I imagine obviously that is a very personal process. Talk to us a little bit about grief coaching. Who needs it? What does that process look like to work with you? How long does that take? All of those things.
Yeah, I received my certification in, let's see, the fall of 2024. And so I am a certified grief coach. And basically, our goal and our role in a grieving society is not to, like, you have your therapist and they provide you ways to grieve. They kind of tell you how to do things. And there's many therapists that are wonderful. But as a grief coach, we are there to walk along beside you. We are there to guide you and we are there to listen. And we aren't trying to fix your grief. And the biggest thing is when I sit with people and talk to them, I talk to them, let them tell me everything. And if they want to tell me the same story over and over and over again, I allow them to do that. And I have a toolkit that I use that I give them. And so I help them build their grief toolkit and it guides them on how to take steps forward during their grief process. And everyone is so different. Some people do need the therapy work, but some people just need a listening coach. And that's kind of what a grief coach is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine, obviously, you have your certification, so there's that level of knowledge there. But I would imagine it really means a lot to people and they're able to really connect to you because this is a road that you've walked and not just walked, but walked time after time after time, had to go through this. So I would imagine as someone who's grieving, it really makes it very easy to connect with you. And I love the idea that you don't force them into a certain process. It's really about listening and seeing how you can help them.
Yeah,
Have you
for
ever
sure.
had any clients that you worked with, any stories from that, things that kind of changed you, shaped you, inspired you?
Not really. Not really. But I have more so, I do a couple pop-up events once in a while for my cards and my stationery items. And I have a lot of people that open up and talk to me at these events. And I hear a lot of stories. And I have people that just sit there and cry and they tell me their story, and I just listen to them. And the biggest thing is I walk away with more than than I've probably given them. Is there's so many people that are grieving in this world, and I know that I've helped people just by listening. And I think as a society, we kind of always say that or feel that we have to fix. We're in a fix it society, and we don't have to do that. We can just be present and listen. And that's what I've noticed at these pop-ups is really I listen, and these people just walk away with thank you for taking the time. And I've had people come back to me and thank me again at these pop-ups after they've made their round. So it really means a lot.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm sure you've made a lot of really great connections. And I imagine it's really cool to meet people that you've encouraged and inspired. That must really encourage you to keep going.
Yes.
So the next question is going to be one that might require a little bit of thought, but if you could only offer one piece of advice to somebody who was going through, who was in the midst of this grief process, what piece of advice would that be?
Honestly, I would say give yourself grace. And I think that's the biggest thing, that we don't have to have all the answers at this moment. And we just have to sit sometimes in our grief. And if you're outside of the person grieving, we always say kind of meet them where they're at. But as a griever yourself, you really just need to sit with it and give yourself grace and know that it's going to be hard and you won't have all the answers. And every single day is going to be different, but each day will get better. And sometimes you'll take a couple steps back and then you'll take a couple steps forward. But it is a process and it is a lifelong journey of grieving. But I always tell people to give yourself grace and don't expect to have all the answers and to feel 100% or fixed, at that moment.
That was great. You jumped ahead, Angie, and you answered both my questions at once because one was going to be for someone going through grief, what's your advice? And my next one was going to be for someone who's trying to support someone going through grief, what's the best advice? So you just went ahead and gave us that wisdom for free, which is to sit with them and meet them where they are. And I think that's advice that's very undervalued, I feel like, in today's society. We don't make a lot of space to meet people where they are. It's all about pushing forward and what can I do and making the casseroles and all the different things, people trying to help. But that's very wise advice for someone who has lived through it. And did you have a very supportive community when you went through all of your loss?
I did, yes. We had a very strong group of friends and community that we lived in. We live in a very small community. So I was blessed to have that because on top of all my grief, my whole family was grieving the same, right? So it was hard to lean on family because we all were in turmoil because we had all lost our people. And so I was blessed to have that. But yes, I'm glad that I answered your question. Meet people
Yes.
where they're at.
Meet people where they're at. No, I love that. Okay, last question for you before we run out of time. And this might be the hardest one yet. So, through everything you've been through, and then turning that into coaching and writing books and encouraging people and all of the different things that you do, what is it you hope your legacy will be?
Oh, that's a good question. I kind of once thought that legacy was really kind of something that we leave when we're gone, but I know that it's something that we live every day. So I want to leave my legacy and I want to live my legacy today. And that's why I do what I do and it's by choosing compassion and creating the meaning in everything that I'm doing and giving someone else hope. And that's by me living my legacy. And by doing that, I think that when I'm gone, that will be a good legacy left.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good answer. I told you that was a hard one. It's a big question to think about when you look at your time, but you're so dead on with all of that. And as I was telling you kind of before we started our interview, so I work in the estate planning world, right? And so it's very interesting because we kind of deal with a lot of those end of life things. a lot of people planning for the end of their life, a lot of people planning for worst case scenario, a lot of people who they have a loss, they're in the midst of grief and they didn't have planning done, and they come in and we have to kind of pick up the pieces and go through that. So it's a very interesting piece of the process. And so through that, we talk about legacy with our clients a lot, and we tell them exactly what you just said. You're dead on. And that is, don't wait until something happens. Legacy is something, figure out what you want your legacy to be and start actively working towards that now. Do you want to be known as a generous person? Well, are you doing things for that? Do you want to be known as a compassionate person? Well, are you doing things for that? And so those are the conversations we try to have with our clients to really have them think through what their legacy is going to be. It's not just getting to the end of your life and whatever's left is left. It's really something that you can make an impact on and something that you can really change and craft as you go through. So obviously you're using your experiences and your grief and your gifting to really take, to me, just about the worst imaginable back-to-back things that could happen and turn those into something positive that can positively impact people. So thank you for sharing your story with everyone and using that grief to really make a positive impact on your community and then just kind of on the world as well.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yes. My true goal is just turning all the loss into light.
I love that. That's really great. That's really great. Is there anything else that I forgot to ask you about that you would like our listeners to know about?
I don't think so. The biggest thing, like I said, is just always give yourself grace. Grace upon grace is what really hope people take away from anything I've said, that it's hard. Life is hard, period. The unexpected happens all the time. But how do we live with intention and move forward in life, with that loss and that light? So.
Absolutely. Great words of wisdom. Well, for our listeners, we want to thank you for joining in. This has been the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. And my guest today was Angie Hanson. And to get connected with Angie, you can learn more about her story and more about all of the different things that we have talked about. You can find it all at butterfliesandhalos.com. Angie's also on all of the social media platforms as Butterflies and Halos. And we're going to link all of that for you in the show notes so that you guys can find it and get connected with her easily. So all of those will be included. And Angie, thank you so much for taking time today just to come on and talk to our listeners, and hopefully anyone who's listening who is experiencing grief or has someone that they love that's going through grief, hopefully they can be inspired and get connected.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more about Stan and Katie Beth, go to pinnaclelegacylaw.com. You can also find links in the show notes.